Hello, I'm Ivan, and I'm going to talk about my journey through a couple of my games that I've worked on in the past 10 years of my game developer life. And most of them have something to do with procedural generation, and a kind of procedural generation that happens at runtime. So not like pre-made assets in some offline software. So first, a little bit of my background. I actually studied architecture. I had nothing to do with games at first, but then I sort of started modding some games because in architecture we learned how to do 3D. And so I was like, okay, I liked games. I'm going to try to import some 3D models. And yeah, it kind of worked, and I got hooked because when I sort of published my mods that I made, people were super excited, and they say, wow, this is so cool. You should make more of this. And that inspired me to kind of move into games from architecture. Yeah, but I've played my whole life. I played like games that are completely handmade, that are authored by people. Like, yeah, here some of the games, like yeah, racing simulators, Monkey Island or Thief here. So I was completely unaware of what I'm going to talk now. So my first contact with procedural generation was at my first game jam. And that was in 2014 at the Global Game Jam in Belgrade in Serbia. A friend of mine who is over there, that was like also kind of the first year with VRs. We had the Oculus Rift was like, whoa, what is this? And we wanted to make a game with it. And the simplest game we could think about was like the space game, where you can like, you're just like in the VR and you're avoiding asteroids. That's all. Like asteroids are coming at you. And since I knew how to do 3D modeling, my friend said, "Yeah, it would be cool if you could make an asteroid." So I made an asteroid, and I told him, "Okay, well, should I now just go into Unity and place 1,000 asteroids in the scene?" And he said, "No, I'm gonna do it." And he made this like the simplest thing ever, which is just like in 1,000 times just instantiate a random asteroid, as you can see here. And at that time I was like, what the hell is this? I was I didn't know games can be made like that. Like you can just create stuff randomly. And because everything I played until then, I thought that there needs to be like a human who makes all the assets. And so at that point I was like, okay, I want to make everything procedural now, because it looked so fun. Like, oh, you can program anything, yeah, and I started into procedural. But actually, my first kind of was a few like joke softwares that I make, which is like these text generators. Well, the first one I made was this like Yugoslav socialist company generator, which, well, you might not understand, but it's kind of like a lot of companies back in the day were made out of like two words that come together, and sometimes they sound really cool and like professional, but then sometimes they're it's just fun to combine completely unrelated words which sound cool but mean nothing. For example, here you can see techno zdravlje, which means just like techno health. What is that? I don't know, but it's cool. And then I had some here the random car part generator, because car parts have weird names. And then finally, for well, later I'm going to talk about in Finland. I made this like Finnish town generator, which a few Finns helped me about it. But their town names are also like made out of 2 random words, and they can mean something completely random. And in this case, you can actually see that this means grain motorboat in English, but it sounds cool. And I actually yeah, it's all actually online, so you can even like check them out and try any of these. Yeah, like I don't know, thermal progress. You understand this? Or big tunnel, or cosmic nitrogen factory, right? Okay, yeah. Here's a Finnish town generator as well, and you can also check what it means. Yeah, like Raven City. Oh, this one is actually cool. Sometimes there are cool ones, and here's the one with car parts. Anyway, yeah. So after this, I made yeah, my first actual real procedural game was Library of Blabber, which is inspired by Library of Babel by Borges, the book. And in it actually tells about a library which is infinite, and it has infinite number of books with completely random sequence of characters, which actually means that you can find a book that can tell you anything, and it can actually explain the way you died, for example, even though you don't know how it's going to be. But there is a book because there's infinite number of books. And there was also this site which was made by Jonathan Basile, and I wanted to make this into like an experience that you can actually like walk through a 3D library and read the books. And so yeah, this was kind of how I started, and I had to kind of, because I didn't know much about procedural generation, I kind of had to reinvent the wheel about how would I go around making a completely seamless experience. And the first one was trying to like understand this architecture of this library. How do you make an infinite library? And I decided to simplify the book a bit. So I made it 2D space. In the book, it is actually 3D. It goes into infinite floors. But I decided to have this kind of architecture because you have this infinite tunnel in front, which kind of I imagined it would look cool, but then turned out that it would make some problems. For example, yeah, you had a lot of ways that you can see other rooms from weird angles. So I had to cover them off, and also this infinite tunnel that you look through, which you can see over on the right. Actually, no matter how long you make it, as you can see here, with how many pieces, you will always see this in the middle. There is a little hole, and you can kind of see that there is it's not infinite. There is a point. So how do you? So yeah, this is where begins my like journey into like how do you find solutions for problems in procedural generation. And so what I thought of was just to take a screenshot of this tunnel and just put it on a like kind of copy it in Photoshop and make it look infinite, and just put it on like a little sprite at the end, as you can see here. So it still looks 3D, but it's so far away that you don't really see the difference. And also, because all the rooms are exactly the same, I don't need to move the world or wrap the world around. I can just move the player. And so that was kind of my first time that I made an endless game, because you can literally just walk through it forever and it will never change because I always wrap the player around. And yeah, and so the books are generated through different methods. I decided not to go with the original plan of original book. It just sets like completely random characters, but I wanted to make it actually readable and fun. So I first went with this vowel constant random chain, which actually makes it readable, because if you put like one consonant, one vowel, one consonant, one vowel, you can actually read it. But it's complete gibberish. So that's the example that you can see here on the left. You can kind of read it, but it just means it's completely meaningless. And then I have a kind of friend of mine gave me an idea to use a Markov chain. That's where I first heard of it, and kind of like use an existing public domain book to feed the Markov chain, and just kind of like spawn words that come after each, which are like the most common to come after another. And that's sort of how like GPT works today, but it's kind of like a poor man's GPT. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't involve any neural networks. It's just very kind of dumb procedural generation. But it was still quite fun to read, although the sentences don't mean anything. Yeah, and so how do I? Another thing is that I need to make sure that every book is always the same. So if you find all the chambers, all the rooms have their own coordinate, kind of like you can go to like 10x 10y, and you will and if you find the exact book on the right shelf, all players can see the same book and can read the same thing. And the way I do it is by having this what I call like address seed, which is like you have an address which you turn into a seed for a certain random algorithm that you use. So in this case, what I did is I just made a string. As you can see here, I have like a x coordinate, y coordinate, which wall it is, because there's 4 walls, and which shelf, and what is the number of book. And then I turn that, I take a hash code, and I simply use that as the seed. So every time you will always encounter the same book. And what this allows is that basically there's no memory for books, right? I don't save the books I simply spawn text as you open the page. Oh yeah, I can just have a tiny demo because yeah, the game is here. You can download it. It's a completely free game. I made it a long time ago. But yeah, this is just building dictionary. This is where the books are fed into the Markov chain, basically. That's the only expensive part, pre-processing part to do. But yeah, here we have the library. It's completely infinite. You can run through it. Sorry. And yeah, and you can come to any book. You can take it, and a regular host. This is like this is a poem book. Oh yeah, I didn't tell about this form. It was on the slide, but I forgot to tell. Which is like, this is basically like random. I just have a preset structure, but then I randomize nouns and verbs that I have in a list. So I don't know, tradition, criticism, waste, physics. What have lawyer file? Fold the shot. What frees the South? Oh, sounds so deep, but actually it's completely because it's totally random. But what I really liked about this is just how fun it is, and you can just find something. Oh, fishing, matter, snicker, key, allege wealth. Oh, you can make poems in this way. And then if I just if I go somewhere, yeah, these are the coordinates of the rooms. You can see this is like 1, 3. And this is actually 0, but because there's no Roman 0, I just didn't put it. So it's a little bit confusing. But if I come to the same place, I can find the book, regular host, there it is. And it's the same thing. There it is. It's tradition. And and one thing that players complained, interesting thing, is that I can take the book from the second shelf, but I can't take the books from the topmost shelf because my interaction array just didn't reach there. But I got complaints which are like, oh, why can't I reach? Like, it's because if you think about it, like, you have 1/5 of the knowledge of this library which you can't ever reach, right? It's kind of weird, but I'm like, yeah, I just like the fact that you can't reach it, although the stuff exists, right? But it was, and of course you can't jump in the game, so you can't ever reach it. And I'm never gonna implement this just because it's funny. Okay, so next up I have slideshow. I have No Man's Sky. This was a game I made in 2016, and it was before No Man's Sky came out. It was kind of a joke because it was like a demake of No Man's Sky, and I made it in like 10 hours at the very end of the jam. What basically it is, it's like it has this infinite universe that repeats, and I just have these spheres which are planets, and they have different colors of surface and of atmosphere, and that's basically it. I mean, that's what I managed to do in 10 hours. But the universe creation is actually quite complex, so to say, because I use the address seed of each of the sectors. So universe is kind of divided into sectors, into grid, 3D grid, and I take the coordinate again of the grid to create a chain of planets, colors, and sizes of planets. And this is basically the code. You have a single sector, and then this is I highlighted where I'm initializing the state. This is again the string which I get the hash code of, and then I use that to run every other random value that I call is going to have the same kind of chain. So you can come back to the same system, and it will look exactly the same. And basically it's infinite. It can, I'm just regenerating new sectors as you're going. And the only thing that is new here is that I'm using like simplex noise for this kind of like, is there going to be a system or not? So that you have these pockets of nothingness. And actually, I met a developer of No Man's Sky a few years later, and who told me that basically No Man's Sky kind of works like this in the the topmost, like the highest level, basically, of it. And it was in 10 hours. And when the No Man's Sky actually came out, people were joking that what the response was like. Oh, it's kind of boring because the stuff is repeating all the time. And they would come back to my game and they would say, well, this is basically the same thing because it's just like green planet, yellow sky, blue planet, green sky, So that was funny. Anyway, it's then another project that this one I never finished, but I do plan to one day, which is like a thought of train, as I call it, which is an infinite train ride experience. And it basically like has this the biomes which you're going through, and you can look at the landscape, and you can basically it is the where the train is in the world is tied to the clock, to the world clock. So every player in the world would see the same thing at the same time. So if you're going through this like snowy biome, another player on the other side of the planet would see the same snow biome, unless they messed with the system clock, but they should. Here I used to make this infinity, I used the origin shifting, which is similar thing that I used in No Man's Sky already, which is just like when you reach a certain point, I just move the whole world back, and you don't notice it because of the whole world moves. What I do is I have these tiles of landscape, which when I get out of the space, I just move all the tiles back forward, and I regenerate them. So it was kind of a very simple system, and then you can make biomes, you can make some other algorithms for making landscapes and stuff. And then also I had this like procedural bridge thing where you can, because if the tracks go over like if the tracks are too high above terrain, then they can generate this bridge. And by the end of the I joined with a friend Color Fiction to make this to kind of make it a little prettier, and we added motion blur always looks good for trains, so we kind of make this, and we had some cities as well. But then that's when we got both busy with other stuff, and so it's kind of like on hold, the project. Another thing that I made is this endless procedural rally racing game called Infinland. And as you can see, it's like a rally racing 3D fun arcadey stuff. But it kind of started as a joke, because when I looked, I was flying to Sweden and I saw this. I saw I saw it from air, and I said, "Look, this is just like 2-octave Perlin noise when you look from the sky." So I was like, and Finland is kind of similar, but with more lakes. And then I was like, okay, maybe I will make a game where which happens in infinite Sweden or Finland. And yeah, and I just thought of this name, like in Finland and in Finland. So I was like, I have to make this game. It's gonna happen. And then I had yeah. So I basically what I started with is this procedural road network, which was quite difficult to make, but I wanted to make it like really easy for players to be able to change any parameters and change how the world completely looks. And what I started with is like this concept of a perturbed grid, which is like, yeah, some call it a jittered grid. This is another concept that I often use in procedural generation, and I used it in the games I mentioned previously, which is like you basically split the world into tiles, and you get a random point in it, and then you can kind of generate anything you want. You can generate nodes for networks, or yeah, and you get the position from this address seed, as I was talking about previously. Yeah, which means that when you get this for each of the coordinates, you can like sample it, and you can have this infinite grid, right? And when you come back, you have the same exact position. And yeah, one other thing is that sampleability, as I call it, is important to be able to like sample for each coordinate. You need to find a consistent value, which is like sine waves, Perlin noise. For every x, you can get an exact y. You can read from a height map, but height maps can get boring. And there are some things that you can't. It's hard to sample, like Voronoi cells, because they depend on the neighbors when you're making a Voronoi sort of network of like graphs. And there are some things that are unsamplable but would be really cool to use, like erosion, because it completely depends on everything around it. And so I started with this road network by looking at the maps and sort of being inspired by them. And I wanted to make it infinite. So I started with a perturbed grid, where each point is a junction and surrounded by 4 other junctions. The cool thing is that it's very simple to make. Junction is bound to a coordinate, as we have seen the tile. So there you make sure that there's only one. Easy to control minimum distances, because you can always space them. You can always say don't generate on the edges. But it's kind of like it always has 4 links. It's too predictable. You can always see how long kind of the road is going to be. But it worked. Like I had this running in one day to have this kind of infinite network of roads. But I said, it's kind of boring. So let's try to use a Voronoi diagram. So instead of using grid points, I want to use them for junctions. And yeah, the grid points form regions. The cool thing is that it's much less predictable. It's more organic. But the bad thing is that you can't easily control distances between junctions, because they can now be anything. They're not constrained to tiles. And since we don't know how, it also depends on kind of the neighbors, the immediate tiles around them. It needs a bounded region to work. Well, I came up with this Voronoi algorithm, and then I kind of what I did is I just generate extra space around them, so to make it work. And yeah, this is like just make a bigger diagram and pick the middle. But then, oh yeah, also I merged some of the close ones, because it would be hard to generate crossroads. Yeah, and then I had, so basically the biggest problem of all of this was how to find which ones are new and which ones are old. So you had to, because they're not constrained to tiles, they would need to have some kind of a system of recognizing which positions are exactly the same. And this actually took most of the time to solve. So instead of having it one day just going with perturbed grid, I went for like a month making this more complicated version. And yeah, the roads are also generated with some Perlin noise, and they kind of smoothly interpolate at the edges. And for kind of hilly roads, they can also generate hairpins. So if I just detect that the angle is too high, I just make a few hairpins. And then I had this basically roads. And yeah, so this is how it kind of works. You have this space between the roads, which I call fields. And you just walk through every road and generate the field in between. And I use the Illinois triangulation. And for the junctions, I use endpoints of roads to create a single junction mesh. And then it was interesting to also work on foliage, which is a very, very common thing for games like this. And yeah, we meet again, perturbed grid. I use it again to place it on tiles. But now I use some Perlin noise to have the visibility. Very similar how I did the planets in Norman Sky. Yeah, and one more thing is that each plant, the position of each plant, I actually kind of optimized it by using a depth map made from top down instead of placing it on a CPU. So it was actually GPU calculated. And yeah, there was a little bit of a problem with collisions because you need to collide with trees, but having all trees collidable is too expensive. So I just have a few colliders around the player and I just place them with the trees. So it kind of looks like this. There's only a few of them and they always like find the next tree that is very close to the car. And then I also wanted to have this shadows that you, as you go into the trees, into the forest, you have this darkness. And I just generated it by creating a sort of just splatting. For each tree, I have this sprite that I render on quads that I render onto a different shadow map. Kind of, it's not a shadow map, but it's kind of a very basic shadow map. And so you get kind of like this. You get this darkness inside. So it doesn't use any, fancy methods like ray tracing, or it's very basic. It works anywhere, and it was very easy to make. And yeah, also there was this the whole shift scheduling of the world. How you, I don't need to go through it the whole thing, but you can see in the actual final example how the world is generated in Finland, where you kind of just generate everything, and I have to figure out which tiles, which fields, and which roads now need to be regenerated and which don't, because those in the middle don't need to be regenerated. And yeah, and there was another game that I made, Trails of Tenere, just an honorable mention, because I don't want to go into the details. But there I used a more simpler kind of Perlin noise to just make terrains. And and I just had this idea of having like persistent trails which are shared between players, kind of async multiplayer. But that was it. That was just an experimental game, sort of. And then there's another game that I work on still. It's like a long-term project, which is a life sim about surviving during the breakup of Yugoslavia, which is a subject very close to me. But there's very little procedural generation in the game except for houses. So the houses are actually made of pieces that I have a special relationship between them that is defined in the editor. So they're where is a wall on the side, or a door, or a window, like or stairs, and then I generate them, and you have a house. And one of the cool things about doing it this way, instead of like making it in like Blender or other modeling software, is that then you can really add more things into your generator. You can add some metadata. Like you can add, if I need to know where the rooms are, I can now define it because I know where the walls are. because I have generated them in game. That's what's really cool about generating it at runtime. Although I didn't really have to do it, but it was very cool because you have this metadata for free. So now I'm aware, like if I open some windows, I know that there are like 3 windows in one room, and I can like darken the room or lighten it, or I can, or if a door is open, I can path find through the house, and like, you know, if there's a speaker in another room and it's playing some music, I can be like, oh, you can hear this clearly. If all the doors are closed, I can muffle the sounds and stuff like that. So you get all this cool stuff for free when you do stuff at runtime. And another thing that I want to mention is in Terminal, which I made with Ferran, who is also here. He has a talk tomorrow. Go see his talk. And this is an endless airport terminal, which we made for ProcChamp 2020. It was in the middle of COVID, so it was an infinite terminal where you can wait for flights that will never arrive. It's very like it's very COVID themed. Although we didn't really think about it, but people wrote articles about like, oh, how appropriate it is. We didn't think about it really. It was more like a fun procedural exploration. So the airport is made out of these pieces that are endlessly placed in an axis. We just wanted to make them curved so that you don't see this infinite, like the same thing I had in library, where we had to solve this infinite perspective, like vanishing point. So we just made it kind of snake around. And then we had these, this is what Ferran implemented, this bending of pieces. This is like different floors, pieces that are inside the terminal, and they will generate stuff on them as well, and you can walk around on them, so that to make it more like organic. Oh yeah, this one is generated for pieces that can bend. And and then we also have like these 2 levels with stairs in between them, and we only like detect where the stairs can be placed. And then we also don't place these stands, perfume stands, duty-free shop stands, because that was another thing that we wanted to add into the game, that you can sort of you can smell procedural perfumes. So all these names, it's kind of like the cherry on top of all the procedural generation that they've made so far. So I'm using all the methods here, like making procedural 3D procedural art of the perfume packets, and then also making these procedural names of perfumes. And also you can read how you can smell it. You can kind of take it, and then you will get a random message about how does your perfume smell like. So you can imagine it yourself even. So it's very airport. And yeah, so to conclude, there are some common techniques that I'm using in all the games, which is like origin shifting. If you have very large or infinite worlds, I reuse a lot of objects, like you have seen with these tiles. When you go forward, I can just like replace them, put them in front, and regenerate instead of allocating new objects, which is very performance friendly. And then you can also process a huge number of objects this way. And yeah, these address seeds, that I call them, for repeating the same random chains. If you have tiles, you can generate stuff inside tiles with the address seeds. And yeah, perturbed grids, very useful. And I don't know, there, for example, people use Poisson sampling, but I feel like it's kind of overrated, and there's too much. They depend from the neighbors as well, and perturbed grids don't. So it's kind of and nobody will notice the difference anyway, except the geeks, you know. And of course, the sampleable noises, which you need to know about, like the Perlin simplex noises, etc., which is like for every X, they will get you a correct coordinate, which don't depend on neighbors at all. And yeah, why do procedural at runtime? You can create endless games, as I did. You can run through this terminal forever. I don't know why, but it's cool. And it's a non-destructor and additive process, because like you basically, whenever you add a rule, it adds on your previous one, and you can change it. You can rearrange rules, and it's not like you're making a model in Blender, let's say, and then if you want to change something, you need to change it. You have to rework everything, right? And infinite variations, yeah, you get it for free, basically. You can just kind of vary the seeds. And you get, oh, what happened? Oh, no. Okay. Yeah, you get metadata for free, which I talked about with this house. So why not do procedural at runtime? Well, it takes more time to develop, of course. Infinite variations can also be boring, as I said with No Man's Sky, in No Man's Sky as well. So it's like at some point you're gonna reach a point where it's like, oh, this is too self-similar, and then it is, yeah, kind of like worse for performance because everything is dynamic. With the static models, you can always like bake them and make giant, do one draw call everything. And then some pro tips: if you don't need to make it endless, maybe don't, because it's time consuming, as I said. Performance, I already mentioned that. But the thing is that making everything procedurally generated can be also addicting to the developer like me. I'm like, oh yeah, I want to make everything procedural, but you need to kind of control yourself to not do it. It's kind of like also automating everything. I mean, you can automate everything, but it's sometimes going to take you too much time to automate your automator, right? And yeah, just try to recognize the rabbit holes and not dive too much into them. That's always good. Like, you always get out of your brain and be like, oh yeah, I don't need to do this. Don't use procedural generation for something that you could do with hands in a very short time, and usually once, right? You're never going to do it again. And the variations sometimes don't bring anything new. Yeah, and like replayability, is it really that important? If you have like a story game and you want to, like regenerate the world, but it doesn't really make any sense. Like if the player is going to just play it once. Interestingness, yeah, and this is what I kind of the conclusion of everything is that interestingness, as I call it, depends on variety. In handmade games, those are like the amount of assets that you can make. Like you make the 3D models, and then the more you add, the more story points you add, the more interesting the game is going to be. I mean, of course, it depends on the quality as well. But let's say that the more stuff there is, the more. But in procedural games, you already have this infinite stuff, right? So there is a lot of stuff, but actually it depends. The interestingness only depends on the number of rules. So the more rules you have, the more stuff you add, the more interesting your world will be. The less rules, like with No Man's Sky, where you have just like one color of planet and one atmosphere. Okay, and that's it. Thank you for listening. You can find me there. You can join my Discord channel as well, where I do all these prototypes. So that's pretty much it. Thank you. And